Hi, I'm Sadhana, software development professional for over 2 decades now. I started my career way back in 2002. Makes me feel very old, believe me. Well, I've been lucky to see many of the paradigm shifting changes that have led us to the industry as we see it today, from client server to pushing my exe or copying and pasting my exes into production server somewhere to all the CI/CD pipelines and XAML that we are here today. But today I'm going to be talking on a very different topic, which is psychological safety. So this is what I used to typically consider the soft side of leadership. I always used to think, hey, I code and nothing else, But then when I started leading teams, I realized that the unsaid or the soft skills are actually the hard skills. And psychological safety is probably one of those essential soft hard skill, which could make or break the success of your team. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about what is psychological safety. I'm sure many of us have heard many different variations of it. And why is it important? And what are some of the things that we can do as leaders to facilitate this within our teams? Can I, with a show of hands, hear from people who have heard this term, so psychological safety? Most of us, right? Google made it ubiquitous, I think, in some ways. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. Like I said, what is it, right? Where did it start from? There are actually 4 stages, so people have gone further and they've broken it down into 4 stages of psychological safety. How we as leaders can facilitate it, right? And what is psychological safety not? Because there's also been, in 2021, we would have had a very different talk than what it is today, right? With the downturn in tech and people questioning, hey, is this all just kumbaya? We need to get work done, right? How do we balance that with all of this soft skills, so to speak? And how do we bring it all together? So a little bit about what is psychological safety in like 4 words. It's nothing but felt permission for candor. So how, as a team, people feel comfortable in voicing their opinions, right? In speaking up and in ideating, in making mistakes, in learning, right? So that's what psychological safety is. Now, why is it important? Well, I think Google mentioned it many times, but I'll say it again. It has been shown that this is one motivator or the primary driver for increased team motivation and engagement. And it actually leads to better decision making, and it leads to a better culture of continuous improvement and learning, right? Teams are actually empowered to learn and improve continuously, right? A little bit about the history of where this term came from. So this started with something called Project Aristotle, which was actually done across several thousands of teams at Google, where they tried to study exactly what is the primary driver, what makes a team, people who have a common goal, or are they people with work streams? And then they started trying to see what measures or how do you measure a team's effectiveness. They tried to take different quantitative and qualitative factors, right? So from the senior or the executive side, they tried to collect a bunch of metrics saying, is it the velocity? Is it the sales? Is it the amount of revenue generated, right? So there were so many hard metrics. And then from the team itself, there was a set of soft metrics which they collected. And then through all of this, they crunched a lot of data to try to figure out what is the one thing that drives high performance within the team. And the one thing, it turns out, across all teams, it was not the team tenure, it was not the experience, it was not the expertise, it was not the individual performance of team members, it was actually this tenuous term called psychological safety, right? So what is psychological safety? we already briefly touched upon it, but actually it turns out that you can actually unpack it and break it down into 4 stages within your organization or within your team. So the first stage, so these are the 4 stages, right? The first is inclusion safety. How comfortable are you bringing your own self to your work, to your team, to be part of your team, right? And the second is learner safety. How comfortable are you to learn? How comfortable are you to be seen learning, right? To be seen saying, I don't know. And when I say you, I also mean, I also would really like all of you to put yourself in the shoes of your team members to say, how do they feel about it, right? And contributor safety. So this is an interesting one. So as human beings, you have that, the typical, hierarchy where at first you just want to belong, right? When you start, think about the first time you started at a new organization. You just want to belong. You just want to be part of a team. And then you want to be able to learn. And then you actually want to start contributing. You want to start adding value to the mission, right? Whatever it may be. And then you also want to have the safety to challenge the status quo. This is the area where magic happens, right? Where the old norms get questioned, where status quo is upset, where innovation happens, right? We are all in the knowledge industry where we are getting disrupted every second day with a new AI tool, right? I can't even keep up with all the new AI tools that are buzzing in my LinkedIn feed. But I think the one thing that we as humans still have an edge over is to think fresh and to ideate and to come together to create magic, right? And that's why this is important. So I'm going to touch briefly upon each of this because it's important to sort of unpack what it is and what it's not, right? So inclusion safety, like I said, think about the first time you join a team, right? Do people know you? Right? And as a lead, what do you do to ensure that people within your organization have or feel this inclusion safety, right? I think one of the things that I have seen from my experience is that whenever we have consistent and clear rituals to connect, it always helps, right? I worked both in very in-person organizations pre-COVID, and I worked remote for the last, in a completely remote organizations. And one thing that's kind of stood with me throughout is people's need to connect, right? People's need for human connection in whatever way and form, right? Which is why we always used to have like a Friday afternoon session, both in office and when we were remote, where we would just connect and play games or just, goof off, and people felt comfortable just sort of being themselves. Role titles aren't thrown around. I think I see this less in the, I think the Dutch society in general is very flat, so we see this less. But I know that there are more hierarchical organizations where role titles matter, and you cannot really be seen disagreeing with your manager or with your, CEO or whoever, right? And differences are celebrated, right? So, and I think as a lead, I think there are things that you can do in order to ensure that these things are actually taking place within your team. So this is an interesting one. Cliques on the team. How many leads identify with this? With a show of hands, right? I mean, so this is one of the things which when I started as a manager, when it's one of those benign sort of mistakes, or I don't know if it's benign, but so when I started in an org, and when as a manager, I didn't really do anything to upset the cliques because it's hard to speak up. You don't want to go up and, yeah, sorry? What's a clique? Oh, sorry. A clique is, okay, say you have a team, right? And you have 2 people in the team who are always speaking up and they're always supporting each other's ideas. That's fine. That's okay. But when there's a 3rd person who speaks up and they're immediately shot down, or they're not even allowed to voice their, it may be half baked, but the idea is to still have space for everyone to speak up, right? So that's a clique. You see them in school playgrounds, but you also see them in organizations, unfortunately. So, that's something that you need to be aware of, and that's where coaching comes into the picture, right? You coach your team members, you give them feedback, you tell them what's acceptable and what's not. The next one is the learner safety. So you have a team, people feel heard, people are talking to each other. But what happens when things change, when the goalpost changes, as it so often does, right? I mean, we are trying to do new things all the time. Gone are the days when when you start with an organization, you're coding the same thing for the first 3 years, right? We don't have that anymore. We're continuously picking up new skills. And then the question is, how comfortable is your organization? How comfortable are you with letting your people know that you are learning as well as they are, right? What kind of a learning culture are you developing within your team? Are you comfortable telling people you don't know things, right? When I joined Shopify, I had never worked on, so I had been on a Microsoft stack throughout my career, right? And then I joined Shopify, which was like Ruby on Rails, right? And I was like, horror, oh my God, how do I start, right? And then, but I had to be really comfortable. It was uncomfortable going and telling, as a new manager, going and telling the engineers, hey, I don't understand this code. But I had to step up and tell them, hey, can you take me through this code? Can you help me? Can you pair with me, right? Because that also sort of that sort of demonstrated to them that it's okay for them to say, I don't know something, that I'll figure something out, right? Learning is considered a waste of time. That is not learner safety. I've done this before, where we had a high pressure project. We had to turn something around quickly. And then I had a choice. I could either bring somebody who had always been doing that, or I could bring someone who was enthusiastic but had to learn, right? And then it's always a tough, it's like, okay, but he knows it or she knows it. They can get it done faster. But I think this is going to be a key factor to keep your team motivated, but also to keep your team fresh with ideas, to keep them innovative and to keep them challenging each other, right? And needless to say, if people feel every day, if they wake up in the morning checking if they still have their job, it's not learner safety. And people being slotted into their roles and competencies. This often happens in organizations where there isn't a lot of churn, right? Where people are very set. I think somebody previously asked the question, how does it work if if there are very small teams and people don't move, then if one leaves, it's a very difficult thing. And then people also get very slotted into their roles and competency, but you can sort of turn that around by encouraging learning, by encouraging people to take on different roles. The next is contributor safety. Well, this is something which, when people have a clear goal, when people know exactly what they need to do, then they go for it. They work on it with passion. And at that point, your job is to sit back and ask the tough questions and then let them figure it out, right? And natural autonomy. So the team knows what needs to be done and they go after it without you sort of hindering them every step of the way. And of course, what it isn't is when people are bored, they're burnt out. And then if you are the one who is sitting there and sort of giving out tasks instead of goals, also guilty. I've done every mistake that all the classic mistakes on the right side that there is to do, right? Because I needed to feel validated as a manager, I used to sort of say, okay, I will do all the task planning because I know exactly how this module works and what needs to do. And I was literally writing pseudocode and handing out tasks, and that's definitely not the way to go, So take a step back, take a chill pill, and let your team figure out and let them make mistakes, right? The last one is a difficult one. And it's, I've also seen it go both extremes, right? Sometimes, and we'll come to it in the next slide, right? challenge your safety. Everyone has a voice and is listened to. We are confronting bad news as it is, right? And comfortable with sharing their half-baked ideas, So even if there's like a half-formed ideas, people are still comfortable to voice it out without fear of being shot down or fear of being ridiculed. And then you can see that your team is engaged in a way that they're constantly trying to see how they can make things better, right? Be it automating some of the more time-consuming processes, be it a simple thing about doing meetings differently, more efficiently. They are all examples of everyday innovation. But if you don't see enough of it, then it's probably that the team is not motivated enough, and you need to really get into the bottom of why that's happening. Are they not feeling listened to? Are they not feeling heard? Right, and what is the reason for that? So, there are also organizations where you don't really have that much of a possibility to voice your concerns, where people are afraid, and then there's like a thick layer of fear, where people are not voicing their opinions, and every time somebody comes up with a new idea, it's shot down because, hey, we've never done it that way, or hey, this is the way we always do it, right? And then everything becomes an argument. It becomes a you versus me, and that's not useful. So, okay, so we all know what psychological safety is, but we also, I can see faces thinking, okay, should I just mollycoddle my team even more, than I am? Should I just play their mother? What should I do, right? How do I get work done? And I think it's important to understand how you as a lead can help, and also what psychological safety is not, which is what we will cover in the next slide. So how can you help? So one of the things is that you constantly, and this is a very simple one, say you have a team meeting, and say you have a design meeting where you're hashing out a particular technical decision, the pros and cons of it. It is your call to take the final decision, right? But then you can also follow it up with a question. Okay, so these are the reasons why I have taken this decision, and these are the reasons why I don't agree with whatever other choices there were, but what have I missed? Or what have we missed? I think this simple question sort of allows people to challenge the assumptions based on which you have made your decisions, right? Encouraged half-baked ideas. I think sometimes half-baked ideas, if you help develop them to the full potential, then they can sort of really take your team to the next level, or the next innovation can come from there, right? We had a very half-baked idea, which, where people were like, oh, I have trouble doing this on our app. And then we just sort of started talking about it, and that led to our biggest feature, which basically gave us our highest revenue, which was like, 5% of our monthly revenue or something came out of that one feature, right? So encourage it. Constructively to ideas. What does this mean exactly? It doesn't mean you have to agree to every idea, but sometimes I used to have this unconscious way of reacting where, a wall would go up and people would just be discouraged from speaking, right? Or if you're saying something like, oh, but how does that make sense? Or something like that, that's not a constructive response to ideas. And also, if you are rejecting ideas, you have to really think things through as to why you're rejecting them, right? You have to give an explanation as to why, right? And that forces you to also think openly about the idea. Way in last, I like to talk a lot, so this was really hard for me. But I understood that every time that I spoke first, it was sort of people would just sort of take a step back and say, okay, the decision has already been made, right? so I'm not going to challenge it. So Wayne last, wait for everybody to speak. Model vulnerability. This is also really hard as leaders, but I think increasingly it's important for leaders to understand that they don't have all the answers, and it's okay to tell their teams they don't know, right? I think it's less of a problem today than it was, I don't know, a few years ago, but still it helps to continue to model vulnerability. And reward shots on goals. So sometimes, you don't always get the answers, but it's one of the ways that somebody's attempted to solve a problem. So reward that, right? And ask for bad news. People probably will not come up to you with the bad news, but ask for it. The next one, this is, we are a little bit running short on time, but this is what I wanted to focus on, is what is psychological safety not? Now, many people think that it's psychological safety is lack of accountability. That, everybody has psychological safety in the team, kumbaya, we are one big happy family, and nobody has to ask anybody anything. That's not what it is, right? Psychological safety should actually lead to increased accountability, because everybody can turn around and ask everybody questions on the team. It's not equal to job safety. It's different. Job safety has many different factors. Psychological safety is just one aspect of it. It's not veto capacity. Just because you have psychological safety doesn't mean that you can veto things, You are allowed to speak your opinion, but then the decision making is still lying with one or a group of individuals, right? It's the consulted decision making model. And it doesn't mean being nice all the time. In fact, if you have increased psychological safety, then you should be able to challenge and be a bit uncomfortable with being confronted with very different views in your team. And it's not equal to unearned autonomy. So autonomy is something that we like to talk a lot about, autonomous teams. But also, I think it's good to coach your team members that autonomy is not unearned. You have to earn autonomy, and you have to earn autonomy by being accountable and being increasingly accountable to the team goals, to your own goals, and your team itself. The parachute. So as leaders, I think sometimes we get so caught up in the way that we try to enable our team members that it's really uncomfortable for us sometimes, and you don't know where you are. And I always like to remind myself of the parachute principle, which is, it's really difficult to show vulnerability while at the same time be responsible for the output and the outcome of a team, right? But that's something that we need to constantly, as leaders, understand that we have to thrive in discomfort, and we have to always be balancing the sides of decision making while allowing enough heft and pull within the team. What I have seen help me a lot is finding a mentor in this case, who I can talk to, who I can sort of ideate with, who I can sort of model this vulnerability with before going and being vulnerable in front of my team. And this is one thing I read recently, which is to create a personal board of directors. Personal board of directors who really care about how you shape as a leader, and who you can sort of ideate with, and who will either shoot you down saying that's a terribly stupid idea, or who will challenge you, who will make you a better leader, right? And I think this is the way that you sort of create a parachute for yourself while you're while you're also working with your team. You're enabling them, and you're creating that magic, that Andrew was just talking about, where the sum is bigger than the individual parts, right? So this is basically what I wanted to talk about, and that's a lovely picture in one of the team outings that we had. So thanks for that, and now I'm happy to take questions.